Well, hello, creatives community and kind folks. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ. And again, as always on this channel, we take pop culture, real world incidents, and all kinds of inspirational evidence, and we use that for our world building on this tabletop role playing channel. And today, here in the United States, is a national holiday known as Juneteenth. And we're going to talk a little bit about the historical facts of it, and very quickly after that, go into how we can use that for our own world building experiences. So, for those who are unaware, the um, there are two Independence Days in the United States. The most popular one, of course, is 4th of July here, celebrated the independence of the nation of the United States from its terrible oppressors from across the pond. And that celebration happens not only here in the United States, but it has been embraced in very many countries around the world. And of course, it happened many generations years ago. But a little, I'll say, celebrated fact until recently was that after that independence of this nation, there were still those who were not free from their oppressors. And so it is a little bit of an irony in the sense that the United States celebrates itself freedom from a dictatorial, oppressive regime to only, therefore, with their own freedom, still continue to have those who are suffering from a dictatorial regime over top of themselves. So on average, 90 years later, from 1776 to 1863 to 65, the United States has abolished slavery. And it took about 2 years for American troops and political figures to scatter across the United States to go from the east out to its far west. A location in Texas, actually noted as Galveston, Texas, was the last recorded location of those that were still under the 2 years later, still under the oppressive hand of slavery. And that date was June 19th, which has been shortened simply um, due to time and telephonism and slang to simply known as Juneteenth. And uh, before it became a national holiday, especially in many parts of the United States, the Midwest and such, this holiday wasn't really known as a holiday. Some didn't even know this celebratory event even existed, the name of it, what its purpose meant, or anything like that. Now, in I grew up on the East Coast, and that particular, I mean, I grew up with it. This was a generational holiday. This was a thing that was celebrated there. When I moved out from Philadelphia out to the Ohio Valley, it was just not even heard of. And unfortunately, here, the Yankee says we have two Independence Days. Then this should have been the sequel to that '90s movie. Yeah, on June 19th, America really becomes free from the aliens. Exactly, exactly. And so, just laying the groundwork for the real world thing, because again, this isn't a history channel. We're not here fact based. We're not here giving lessons. Really, what we're doing here is to be creative. And one of the uh, things that is a bit sad, and you can tell, just for me, you can tell the fear and the peddling of emotion and such. There are many people who here in the United States who are opposed to even having something like a Juneteenth celebration or a national holiday. Those who never grew up with it or didn't even know about the the byproduct of fear, of course, is anger, mainly because ignorance and fear are weaknesses. People don't like to express their weaknesses or to be recognized for them. So the easiest way to alleviate oneself of weakness is to show some form of strength, and anger and destruction tends to be that behavior, that byproduct. And so there are those who are against even having uh, such an event, and even belittling its existence, even though there were probably a good three generations of people that celebrated Independence Day on one hand, and then were hypocritical in the sense of, yay, we're independent, we get to keep our own slaves, right? The hypocrisy, right? But but this kind of like um intermittent historical event uh, tends to be far more common when we talk about history than we give it credit for. When we discuss histories of any type, usually it's down into a sound bite, right? It's like, oh, we defeated the dragon, we overcame the Lich King, we cast out the Raven Queen, or something of that nature. In fantasy, even in science fiction, like the End King says, like, yeah, we really defeated the aliens. Like the first time we defeated aliens, but that wasn't the real defeat. This time we really escaped the control of the aliens. And uh, when we look back at histories, it's usually a lot more muddled and confusing, even to the point where it's rather funny. Uh, the We talked a little bit about the House of the Dragon yesterday, and there are some who are distraught about the portrayal of a specific event, namely Blood and Cheese, as described in a book, and no one is taking into account that George R. R. Martin, who wrote the book Fire and Blood, wrote it from the point of view of a historian, a Meister or Maester, who then took other people's accounts to write a history book. So it's not even a firsthand account. It's an account of other people's accounts of other people's accounts of those people who may not have even been there, and yet people are like, "That's not how it was in a book." And I'm like, "Nah, yeah, that's history. No one was really there, so maybe you're a little bit off." And this is the kind of event. Juneteenth and Independence Day aren't necessarily uh, one leads to the other, right? If the United States had never gotten its own independence, how would they then be able to rally themselves with the Civil War and gather together and then decide that, you know what, our country, we really shouldn't have slavery any longer? Now, I have on me one of the very few. I have a T-shirt that displays the very few photographs captured of individuals known as the Buffalo Soldiers. There's a movie made about a group of them known as Glory, Denzel Washington, and many other uh, very popular actors, and kind of portrays them freed and escaped slaves that were then people who volunteered to basically be in war, in a civil war, to enact freedom. And in a fantasy realm, let's go with fantasy first. It's very possible that, you know, one or more factions or governments or whatever, you know, you get into wartime. Maybe it required, I don't know, the I have a setting that talks about the enslavement of hill giants to erect a wall and a city around a imprisoned, dying Tarask. And, you know, the hill giants were enslaved because they needed their help to ensure that the Tarask could not escape from the grasp to run rampant over the countryside. Now, I'm sure the hill giants were like, we'll help you out. But the nations were like, yeah, but we need to guarantee your help. And it's possible that, the dwarven hold that was taken over by the other goodly races, the dwarves were kicked out of their home as the other goodly races took refuge in their um their subterranean homes or something, or anything of that nature could have happened in a wartime effort. And yes, the people could have won, but at the end of that, do you release the hill giants? Maybe the hill giants were like, listen, our people should be free by now. And there was even arguments back in the day that supported slavery, not for moral reasons, but basically like, well, we can't get abolish it, because what happens when those people are now free? They might just turn on us. Same thing happened in the same kind of retributive activities were fearful of those that happened in South Africa when apartheid was ended. It was the oh, we know we did wrong. We're just afraid of what might happen when we try to do right. And there are some people who really like rationalize themselves that way, like, well, I know we're doing wrong, but maybe we shouldn't change the thing. The Ancient King says, looking at how our country really dragged its feet and made so many exceptions to the end of slavery, I can see a campaign being set after an evil empire's defeat as they try to undermine it. Yep. Yeah, yeah. And of course, listen, it getting rid of the historical soundbite. Yay, 1776, freedom for the people, right? We know that over time that it was incremental changes, like oh, I was about to say Tom Sawyer laws. Jim Crow laws down in the South were a thing that happened after that. Even the perception of African Americans here in the United States during slavery, there wasn't a promotion of fear. Uh, Slavery here in the United States was looked at as, well, they are benign. I would, shoot, what's a horrible descriptor would be like pets or lesser folk who need the guidance and protection of a parental figure. And then once freedom happened, it was like, oh no, they going to take all the white women. That's a horrible way to say that, but that's exactly what happened. There was a lot of propaganda spread, like, well, we don't know if we could trust those people, and it's like, well, you kind of created your own situation that way. Then King says, but sure, if that's disrespectful to use real slavery as inspiration in that way. And I'm saying this because, listen, when it comes to world building, and even those individuals, world building isn't just reserved for tabletop role playing games, right? It's for writers and artists and playwrights and people who want to make novellas and video games and things of that nature. And we are all influenced by our things around us, our past knowledge, histories, and things like that. And I feel like if you want to include, I'm not one of these people who wants to sanitize role playing games. And I understand it's not appropriate for all role playing games, but if you wanted to include something like this to give it a lot more, instead of just a black and white event, oh, the humans and elves defeated the goblinoids and freed themselves. Boom, we're done. Right? Like maybe there's a little bit more nuance involved in it. And so yeah, I like where you're going with it, N King, and you are absolutely thinking of it in a more holistic manner, right? Like, yes, the Lich King with the undead armies did assault the goodly peoples, but what happens at the end when the Lich King is destroyed, right? Are there people who have, I don't know, taken control of small but uh, influential and pivotal armies of the undead? Because if they've got undead out there, I don't know, doing, harvesting foods, well, that's free labor. And what about the grandmoms and the small undead children where the families are like, yeah, we don't want you using our undead relatives for your harvests. No matter how much you keep trying to rationalize away, like, well, they're just their souls are gone. We're just using the bodies, right? Um, but I mean, you guys know I've even described like you could have good people using necromancy in a way. Like there could be these uh, soldiers standing on the wall, and even unto death, they have dedicated their lives to protecting the people. So maybe families and friends are wrapping and rewrapping the slowly decaying bodies of their loved ones who have devoted themselves to being watchers on the wall, and so the undead soldiers may actually be reinforced by a public or a guild or something that takes care of them, which still free labor usually makes out a whole lot more than those that have to be compensated for such labor, and that's where the economic issues come in. But also, you know, it's a perceptive issue, right? Like we know in our real time real life, without naming any particular countries, when two peoples go to war with each other and that war ends, the feelings don't stop. You know, I mean, there's plenty of people who are like, yeah, I don't want the war to end because I still need my retribution against enemies. And when things are done during wartime efforts, we all know that there are major sacrifices, forced, willing and unwilling, upon their own population to get a thing done. As a matter of fact, in the latest episode of the very first episode of season 2 of House of the Dragon, there are, you know, the what are the common folk called? Oh, I can't remember the name. It'll come to me. Anyway, the common folk are beseeching the king, like, listen, you're pulling my livestock, and we need to. You're telling us to get ready for war, and we're making weapons, but we're not being compensated, and that's just a minor extraction from the population. When the government starts to force work out of the people to achieve a goal, do the people go, yeah, I get it, I understand, or are they still pissed off and like, listen, my relatives and my kids and my parents and stuff like that were worked to the bone. They were murder killed for the goodness of this country. What do I get out of it, right? Um, yeah, Dan King says when I say I like realism in my games, this is what I mean: the messiness of history. Yep, very unlike a Star Wars ending with the Empire just losing. Yeah, I want to see what happens to the rebellion after. But I mean, listen, there were a lot of people, very common, everyday people that lived under the Empire's thumb, that were like, listen, okay, we got two choices. We can have no government, no overriding oppressive government. And then what happened to my business? I got robbed all the time by like smugglers and traders. Bounty hunters were pushing through my community. We had, you know, all kinds of warlords and things like that. Yeah, the empire was horrible, but at least we knew how they worked, right? And that's a very Andor, the show Andor really dealt with that thing. Like there were a lot of innocent people who said, listen, I just don't want to be bothered. I just want to lead my life. Yes, the empire is corrupt, but at least I knew who to pay off, right? I knew I knew the proper words to say. I knew to downcast my eyes when important personages walked by. And yeah, did that crush my soul? Sure, but that's a whole lot better than randomly rolling the dice. Um, Shout out to tabletop role playing games, randomly rolling the dice and wondering which next warlord's going to come through to appease their own um, deviant appetites on me and mine, and my population and stuff. Yeah, Star Wars. Yeah, it's the exact same thing. The Empire's done. Yeah, okay, where'd they go? You know, the leadership in the Empire also bred. They also had families and friends and things like that, And I'm pretty sure a lot of them were like, um, there's a side note. There was a at a certain point for me working with the government post office, there were some employees that were so horrible that they were close to getting fired. And one of the tactics used by management was, we can fire you, but an option is you work for us. And I used to shake my head like, why would you do that? Now, on the surface, it sounds like, well, if an employee is about to get fired and lose their job, that if we recruit them, they will be more loyal to our side. But that's not how it worked. What ended up happening is the people with the work habits just transferred those exact same bad work habits into a managerial position. It was like that didn't solve anything. And the same would have happened in Star Wars and Empire, right? Those people that supported the Empire, their personalities didn't change, even if they changed their clothes, right? Dan King says, I one time wanted to run a Star Wars game set immediately after episode 6, as we see the Empire fraction to trillions of inter-civil wars. Yep. Like Charlemagne's kids after he died, resources wasted. Exactly. Um, you would definitely have like these petty like infighting, and like which which personality takes over, which person with the most resources starts to influence a thing. And then there's always the tenuous relationship of uh, even in a rebellion. When a rebellion takes over, we know in the real world, rebellion takes over an oppressive regime and they free the people and everyone goes yay. And then the unsexy thing has to happen, right? People need food, water, jobs, security. Government literally needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. And if it wasn't, the United States really benefited from like the forefathers, in the sense of many of them were like, you know what? If we win, we're going to need some rules. We need a government. We need a postal service. We need newspapers. We need like communication. We need roads. We're going to need all this stuff in place, because if and or when we win against our oppressors across the ocean, what are we going to do? And of course, a lot, ironically, it was like we're going to drive on the other side of the road, and we're going to use we're going to use an imperial system instead of a metric system and stuff like that. Like someone had to come up with that idea, and it would be pretty interesting to run in a world where that happened. I mean, if the elves and the humans were fighting off the goblinoids, but they end up not just recruiting the help from the dwarves and the gnomes and the halflings, but literally conscripted them into war. I mean, we in the United States for a very long time had a draft. Some would say, well, drafting really isn't slavery, but if you have a forced labor force that's into you force them into a war, the war is over. When the war is over, you just wipe your hands of the whole thing. You might have some pretty harsh um, responses from those individuals that was like, listen, I just wanted to go about my life. You threw a gun in my hand, threw me into a meat grinder, and now you won't even accept uh, my missives that I'm sending to you to compensate me because you just ruined my business and took me away from my family, and now my crops are dead. You built structures on my property that I can't get rid of, and now you expect me just to shrug my shoulders and go, well, at least you're free. um, yeah, there's a lot of that. As a matter of fact, we're seeing a lot of stories here told in the United States. When I say stories, media, movies, television shows about the soldiers that are the antagonists or sometimes protagonists in some anti-governmental criminal endeavors and things. Lots of procedural television shows are not just about bank robbers, but they are ex-soldier bank robbers. They are ex-soldier freedom fighters, ex-soldier sovereign citizens that are again anti-government and things like that. Um, Cyberpunk Cyberpunk 2020 and it's all those iterations. Cyberpunk 2013, 2020. I think 2056 is Cyberpunk Red, 2077. Um, a lot of that is built around soldiers that were conscripted into military, well, corporate military service, and the corporations and governments fell. And then the soldiers literally had the long, I believe it was called the Long Walk Home. Um, During the heyday of the tabletop, the Artausorian Cyberpunk 2020 game, soldiers were down into Central and South America. Of course, it was written during a time when the United States was putting in what was it called? Banana republics, I think they called them. The United States were trying to insert United States friendly governmental figures in these locations in Central and South America. And so that was reflected in the tabletop role playing game. And then the government, United States government fell, the corporations dominated. They went up the gravity well and things like that, dropped some orbital bombardment at some certain points in the history of Cyberpunk. And a lot of those soldiers became solos. They became like, hey, my only skill is to kill people. I'm just going to take the long walk back home, and so that's what happened. The Yankees, I don't know if I'd call conscription slavery, but it's pretty bad. I agree with you, right? Like I mean, even as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, that's not exactly right, but you get the point, yeah. But anyway, the Yankee goes on to say, especially in early American history, 18 you can be drafted, 21 you can vote. Oops. Yeah. Yeah. 18 you can be drafted, you don't get a choice. 21 you get the vote. Sorry, we already used your labor. Right? And mind you, throughout history we've seen various iterations of extracted labor, from indentured servitude to conscription to um wow, now my brain can't even think of so many of them. An example of this, to be honest with you, is I am a descendant of people known as the contraband. So during this is another historical thing. So sorry about that. I know I'm going away from tabletop role playing games, but it makes a point. So um, the contraband were, air quotes, freed slaves, and I'm going to just tell you why there's the air quoting freed slaves, from the war effort with the Civil War. And during that time, on the books, slavery was still a thing. People were still owned. And so the Northerners were like, oh, well, hey, Southerners, if you still want to keep these on the books, guess what? That means that when we go down south and we capture your resources, oh, maybe they're not freed because on the books slavery still existed. They are our contraband. They are our property. And mind you, those individuals are pulled up to like Virginia, Hampton, Virginia, specifically where my ancestors, um, recordings of my ancestors come from, were known as the contraband. And during the contraband era, they were not treated as slaves. They were free to make businesses, schools, art, music, all kinds of stuff, just wandering, and built up Hampton, Virginia into a major coastal port city. Here comes the problem. So when war happens, war is very expensive. And after the war effort, the United States was like, okay, how are we going to recoup all of the monies that were spent to engage in this civil war? So the government did a thing that I'm sure some didn't want to do, but they had to recoup that money. And so they told all the contraband people, well, listen, remember all those businesses and theaters and music and schools and the buildings that you made and the economy that you built up for us? Technically, it belongs to us because on paper you belong to us. So anything you create belongs to us. So we're going to take that from you. And you have two choices. You can either live the rest of your life in you could walk free and do all these things, but on paper, you are still property. Or you can go free, but all your shit we're taking. And so to a person, and mind you, this is messy history, so I'm sure it wasn't exactly like this, but historically, the contraband all said, no, I'd rather be free. You can take my shit. I'm leaving, right? I'd rather not have that on paper because you could take that back anytime there, United States government. So I'd rather have a document that says I'm free. And so Hampton, Virginia was taken over by the government, and the people basically left. They were kicked out. And even that event, right? Like in a fantasy or even sci-fi kind of world building, um, it could be maybe the dwarven hold where all the people moved into the dwarven hold to save themselves from the Lich King's undead armies or whatever. The dwarves come back and they're like, hey, knock, knock, knock on the front door. We built this and we live here. We'd like to move back in. And the elves are like, yeah, but we're pretty comfortable here. Like, no, well, you can move back, but technically during the war, we actually signed paperwork that says we actually own your dwarven hold. So you could be free to move back in here, but when we want to, we can come back in and take what we want. I mean, we're not going to do it, you know. I mean, there's all kinds of like strange, un unresolved conflicts that can happen amongst the goodly people. Heck, even player characters, it would be pretty interesting for player characters to think history happened one way. The soundbite history. We fought off the evil warlords and created freedom for all. And then the players are like members of a knighthood or expeditionary force or something that's looked at as goodly. And when they get out to the let's change it up. They get out to the Knoll tribes and the I don't know lizard folk and such, and the lizard folk are like, listen, y'all don't realize that you benefited from our efforts too. And the knights are like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah, remember those all those dragon riders and those giant lizards you guys rode on? Yeah, that was from us. That was help from us. You took our mounts. You didn't just all of a sudden just develop I don't know, a spiritual bonding with the wyverns and things like that. That happened because we gave them to you, and your government forced us to do that, right? And the knights are like, "Ooh, shit! I didn't. That makes a whole lot of sense. No wonder. I mean, why would we just all of a sudden start riding on the backs of lizard things, right? You're like, yeah, that was us. Thanks for not putting us in your history books. you know, um, just even the idea that um, people are forgotten in history itself is can be pretty traumatic for people. Right now, historically, there are people whose history is being erased, and when you don't know who you are as a people, not as a person but just as a people, when you can't look back in history and go, oh, those are my people, and oh, that history belongs to me. Genetic testing is a popular thing because people want to know where they came from. Even if they don't know where they came from, they're just like, that's kind of cool. I have 18% of those people. That's kind of cool. Or no wonder I like this kind of food. Or I always thought I was from this culture, but really genetically I'm from this other culture. I wonder how the people I didn't know got to where the people that I do know came from. And we love to know our origins and that we are yet another cog in a bigger machine of things that are happening. And when you, or not you, but when we start to erase that history, then people don't have a connection to the past, which means they may not feel like they have a connection to the future development of a group of people. And even here in the United States, there are those who are extremely scared simply because their population is dwindling. and that's fearful to them. They're like, what? We're not the majority any longer. We're going to get bred out of existence. We need to do something about it. Like there's literally fear of that, to the point of actual physical violence and such. And in a fantasy world or science fiction world, um, I always talk about posthumanism. And in a science fiction world, if artificial or genetically created or genetically modified human beings are sent out into space, at a certain point, we as humans traveling to Mars and the moons of Saturn and out past the Oort cloud, at a certain point, humanity may not even be humanity by the time we get to that point. And I could see conflict happening when you have three biologically human born people, but the other 18 exploratory scientists are robots and downloaded brains and AI systems and have nanotech running through their bloodstreams, and half their brain has been replaced with electronic downloads, and they're more they're more cy they're more Borg than cyber. No, well, cybernetic would be the thing. Anyway, you get the point. They're less human and more machine, or just genetically modified with, I don't know, nictating membranes and anti-radiation skin, and I don't know, multiple arms or something, or uplifted animals and things like that. Yeah. The Ant King says, of course, in the ancient or fantasy world, conscripting villagers into your dark army, that's pretty much slavery. Medieval world sucked. Listen, even the if we had to pick a side in history, and you can always pick a small or large part of time, that every single culture around the world at some particular point were both the heroes and or the villains at a particular time, depending on the period of time we looked at. And yeah, even the good guys did some pretty heinous things to get things done. And unfortunately, um, like in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, while some think it's a little bit torture torture porn when it comes to like when all the good, honest, upright, dutiful, um, lawful people are usually punished for their good deeds, it's because to be an effective leader, it it is giving us the lesson that to be an effective leader, um, means you have to make some pretty terrible choices, and it's a shame to have to teach that lesson. And yeah, does George R. R. Martin like really beat you over the head with that lesson? Sure, I do agree with that for those who are like really against that kind of thing, because it's not really balanced. It very much falls on the side of decadence and sadism and things like that. But yeah, the Ant King also goes in to say, I need to see a dwarven Uncle Sam as a very nice, charismatic, two-timing huckster. Yeah, snake oil salesman and stuff like that. Yeah, we need you with a big old finger and a big beard, and you got to have the pseudo Scottish accent and the braids in the hair. Like, I need you. Um, also, historically, you know, we could start to permutate a the reason why a community may want to delete bits and pieces of history. For example, yes, we love our fantasy realms where the golden and white, pure white linen and silk draped knights go to war on open battlefields where everyone can see them and horns are blowing. And the skies open up and the sun shines down with celestials and all that kind of stuff. But what about all the dirty assassins that were hired in wartime? Like, we really don't talk about all of the underhanded, dirty assassinations and tortures and briberies and things like that. The underhanded dealings that allowed the very public assaults on other peoples and countries and things like that, even for the victors in those wars. We don't erect many statues like, oh, there's a statue of the person that stabbed two innocent people in the back and poisoned the, I don't know, the military commander and set fire to the house of his family and friends, right? Like, we don't really erect statues like that. Often, even in our own media, we see, and I don't know this if this is a real thing or not. We see like the Black Ops CIA agents, and there's that wall that I believe it's very true, but I don't know for certain that a the wall of stars for the CIA, the agents that lost their lives um, as secret hidden agents, that a janitorial service person drew a star and carved it into the wall without anyone telling them what to do, and it became it was like this person wanted to honor those that were lost that worked there, and from that point on, that template that was that was drawn in a piece of cardboard is saved, and that template to this day is still being used. I don't know where I heard that from. Like I said, it that even in and of itself, it could even be mythologized, but that is an example of like, yeah, is that history? Is that a true history? Sure. Do we really want people to know about that? No. For every paladin that went to war in fantasy, for every 10 paladins, how many assassin rogues and warlocks were used to achieve our our goals. We really don't know, but we all know that that was a real thing. From spy work to assassination, to kidnappings and things of that nature. Um, Here in the United States, we've seen plenty of media show, the use of drones, and oh, there's an individual that's an enemy of our state, but they're living in a compound with their family and friends. You know what? Launched a bunker buster bomb anyway, even though we know we're going to kill innocents, and then thereby creating even more enemies of the state. Um, Something else that we could also, other storylines we can pull for our world building when it comes to the differences between an Independence Day that's a very public celebration of the freedom of a country, and Juneteenth, which is, well, we were free, but we still had these other issues going on. Could be like a hidden secret police kind of effort. So let's say the player characters are walking around this goodly world, and the classic knights of goodly knights of order and justice became an internal secret police network of, we need to root out the evil ones in our country after the Great War against the Lich King, because there's other necromancers, and maybe some, while they were successful in rooting out the evil, like being witch hunters, maybe there were a bunch of innocent people that were rounded up as well, just to make sure that the eternal Lich King and its phylactery, before the people even found out there was even such a thing as a phylactery, even got out. And such. Yeah, the End King says, "I'm sorry, we keep getting off of Juneteenth. This is a cool idea you have." Dude, I've been trying to pull these ideas out of my ass all the time, and I think if I have to say something about this channel and you guys being part of it, is that our imagination and our thoughts are like a muscle. Just like people go to the gym to lift weights and exercise their demons in many ways, right? I think the mind is also a thing that we can exercise as well. And when sometimes we as creatives get frustrated when we have a mental block and we go, "Oh, I don't have a creative idea in my mind," I'm thinking, nah, you're probably better than you think you are. You're more creative than you give yourself credit. Just look around you. Look at your sneakers and the lunch you're having, and the strangely acting stranger you see walking across the street, and the airline that you hear flying overhead, and the pet that's playing with a piece of string, whatever. Right? It's all those little things you see around you. The wasp that keeps buzzing around your head that you want to swat at, but you're also scared because you're like, if I kill that wasp, is their friends and family going to come after me? Oh, little things, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've got this great idea for this adventure where there are these predators and there's these giant wasps and they ride on the wasps are so large they ride on the back of them and blah blah blah, right? And it so you see the rabbit hole I'm going down. Then he says, we don't talk about assassins, just like we don't talk about logistics. Ooh, logistics. Ooh, yeah. We don't talk about the looted enemy villages or how many knights became bandits after peace killed their paycheck. Yep. Yep, we don't talk about that. Hell, just logistics itself. Oh my God. One of my coworkers, um, oh, she was a great person. Anyway, her and her husband were in the military, and she served in Desert Storm and also served in Iraq. And she was part of a supply chain. And she talked about the fact that like um we focus on the warriors, right? You know, guns, armor, swords, spells, starships, and like we the sexy part is the midst of battle. You know, you've got these brave, skilled individuals going to battle, drawing laser swords, doing battle with star knights and mental wizards and all that whatever. But the logistics part for every soldier, you I would I'm underserving this. I bet there's at least 20 to 50 air quotes non-combatants that are logistically involved in ensuring that that warrior goes to war. So, we're talking about fuel, food, um, outfits, just setting up military bases, communication. Um, so many things are involved in setting up war. And I remember my coworker was talking about being in these long fuel. So they driving through the Middle East during the war in Iraq and Iran and Kuwait and all that kind of stuff. That you had these like you know 20, 30, 40 long vehicles of fuel, water, food. And she was part of these logistical trains of supplies. And she said their commander got them lost and turned around. And they got these huge reports about IEDs being on the roadways. And of course, the real fighting where all the super armed and defended places were away from them because they were a logistical line. They were just traveling from A to B. And she said they got lost. And you talk about the rising panic in everyone. And she said from that point, she's like, I'm out. I am out. Like, there was no air cover. They didn't have like super armored vehicles following them. It was supposed to be a simple go from A to B. And they went off the beaten track. And she's just like, holy shit. Like, how valuable the resources they had taking it from one place to another. And no, we don't really talk about that. Like, and you're right. We don't talk about assassins. We don't talk about logistics. We don't talk about looted enemy villages. And before the modern age, it was a known feature that when a winning force took over a losing force, they would loot. It was an accepted practice to loot the you would get your it was the okay, I'm mixing words in my head. Fantasy gaming wise, it was the collecting of treasure. In reality, what it was like a lot of debauchery. It was allowing the winning forces to go, listen, I understand they have a murderous their adrenaline is so high that they are thankful for their lives, and to burn off that energy so that it doesn't come back home, we need to let these warriors go. And they would I'm going to use the word grape and pillage and steal. I mean, if you were lucky, all they would do is steal stuff, right? Like that was the good thing. Sometimes they would just burn things down and torture people in the open fields and things like that, uh, just simply to get revenge on the fact that they were conscripted in the first place because they didn't even want to be there. You know, yeah, yeah. We don't talk about that. What's the movie? Three Kings. There's a movie about American soldiers going into Kuwait or something, or Libya, whatever. It was something like that. And they found out about gold, and they were trying to steal gold that they found in like a crown prince's castle or something. And they're trying to sneak the gold back out. And they went and they dodged their own group, because getting lost was a very common thing, and to try to steal the gold to bring it back and whatnot. And you're like, yay, they're going to get the gold. But wait a minute, maybe they shouldn't do that, even though the gold itself was an ill-gotten gain from the oppressors of their own people. Yeah, I mean, how many of these goodly knights would find a rod with a skull on it that allows them to raise the dead and make their own undead army? There's going to be at least one of those goodly knights that's going to stick that in their back pocket, right? um, yeah. How many knights became bandits after peace killed their paycheck? We really, why is it we have such a hard time re um re-assimilating, or just bringing back into the fold the individuals that we trained to go out there into the world, and not bringing them back into the fold? Um I feel like the samurai idea should really be embraced in in a soldier's life, meaning like, um, bringing them back into the fold, decoupling their ideas of what war is like, and having a force. I almost feel like we should have another military force made up of ex-soldiers that are brought back from war, whose only job it is to is to train new soldiers who are brought back from war how to fit back into civilian life. Yeah. Yes, Drew, you're so right. Soldiers are expendable. That's why nobody cares. Yeah, you're right, and it's horrible. Like, the United States has such a horrible homeless problem. I'm like, why wouldn't we just, we could literally make a, we have so many um jobless, homeless, psychologically scarred, physically scarred soldiers, that we could literally make another whole army, a military branch just made out of those people, to go around saving the lives of other people in the same predicament. And yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible. And those are we don't erect statues and make celebrations of that, do we? We don't. And Juneteenth as a holiday here in the States, as a person who grew up celebrating that, and when I hear people are like, we don't need, I don't know why this shouldn't exist. They're just trying to bring up a thing in the past. I don't understand, and kind of erase that history. And when I see people doing that, I'm going, in my head, I'm like, you do realize this is your history. Like, this isn't just my history as I rub my own flesh. This is our history, in terms of, this is how we handle history. Do we really want to handle history this way? History for me is neither good nor bad. It's a fact. And that is why there is the term, if you do not learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. And going back to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, uh, George R. R. Martin likes to write these cyclical historical accounts where you see the same characters doing the same, I mean, not the same characters. You see the same archetype of characters doing the same thing again over and over again, because they never learn. And it's the same thing. We keep making soldiers expendable, and those expendable soldiers, like the End King says, even samurai had Ronin. When you have highly trained individuals who are cast off, no wonder you're having highly trained, armed citizenry working against your own government that you trained, sent out there, and then act and air quotes forgot about them. No, you know where they are. You just don't care, and it's horrible. I mean, a very small portion of our um, taxes would probably alleviate that issue, and yet our own politicians that are so willing to um, send people into battlefields that are poor. Essentially, so a lot of these people really don't have a good way out of their middle America home life, and no education, very few opportunities, and they join the military. Also, if we look throughout time and history, the governments have benefited from the presumed honor it is to serve, and that manipulation of good service has always been used by governments. Samurai service, uh, cowboy service, service by what's another knights, even like if we take a look at the lowest realm, the lowest rung of our warriors throughout history, we see that there is this overriding honor it is to serve um, in those warrior functions. Samurai being so dedicated to their honor that they would give up their life to break a promise, right? Knighthoods where they honor and serve a king, no matter what the king's instructions are, that they would give their lives. Even here, even getting a little bit more towards our modern era, the classic cowboy out there with a lone gun, the lone marshal instilling law and order. Um, I brought up Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves, one of the most notoriously honorable and greatest lawmen to have ever lived, instill law and order in like Western Texas, the very outskirts of the beginnings of the United States of America. And this person had a 30-year career, who used to be a slave, who became this individual, and a lot of these people forgotten. And guess what? Like the television show, what's the television show? Yellowstone, about cowboys working in the modern day, in the outskirts of the largest known cattle ranch or horse cattle ranch, whatever, to have ever existed, and the people that want the land. When we take a look at that lifestyle, the people above them benefit so much from that free labor. They benefit so much from the people giving up their lives. Those cowboys, they never got rich. They never had their own. Those people were ridden dry and put away wet, and their lives. How many samurai gave up their lives and never really got the received the I'm going to dare say celestial gifts that the people above them lived under, in their mortal coil. Yeah, speaking of cowboys, gunslingers would act as outlaw in one town, then become sheriff in another, whatever pays better. Yeah, very much so. So anyway, we've come to the end of this. You guys know I love to mix real world with fantasy. Again, this channel is about tabletop role playing games. So errors in history and things, I like to talk big picture. And so when we talk about world building and things of that nature, I'm a person who, yeah, let's confront the real aspects of this thing. We don't need to sanitize all role playing games. And I feel like, well, instead of sanitizing them, why don't we just embrace it? Maybe there is a particular reason why in classic fantasy gaming, the elves and the goblinoids were at each other's throats, because maybe the elves weren't as goodly as we like to think they are. Maybe the goblinoids, despite their evil acts today, maybe they have a good reason. It's like, yeah, elves and your grand Rivendell cities and stuff. You know how you built those? you built them on our backs, and you didn't even erect a single statue in our honor." And the elves are like, "Well, you're not. We remember because we're still alive because we're ancient living, but why would you guys remember? We figured you just die out and forget about it, right?" Twiddle thumbs, looking away, crossing fingers, like la da 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 da, right? I mean, we never know. That could be a thing for the extremely long-lived races. They may have made the decision to go, yeah, we probably, if we do this very heinous evil thing, will we just outlive the history of these shorter lived races, and they'll just forget, and they go, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. They'll forget 3 generations later, they won't even remember. And the elves are like, all right, we're going to do it. We're going to, you know, dive down the hole of, we're going to spiral down the sphincter of decadence and come out smelling like shit on the other side, and no one will ever know. um that was the plot, kind of Elf Quest. If you guys ever remember, if you're people of a certain age, Elf Quest, Elf Quest, the let's see if we can get some images here. If you guys ever remember the illustrated and rather adult Elf Quest, uh, at least the originals. I haven't read all of them. I just remember reading the first 4 very thick illustrated Elf Quest. Let me put up an even bigger picture here. There we go. Illustrated Elf Quest from Wendy Peeney. Wendy and who else? He's something. Wendy and her partner. Anyway, one of the plots, mind you, the story takes place with these elves, and they are like these are the classic, very short elven types. And in one of the histories, they end up finding out about their history. And what is, spoiler alert for something that came out in the 80s? Um, One of the histories that they found out about was that true elves, the tall, extremely tall high elves that were like psychic, that traveled through the astral realms, used these trolls and goblins as they kind of created them as servants. They were like these, this is weird to say, they were biologically created servants that were manipulated to be partially intelligent with their great psychic powers, that today we would look at as magic. But it was like they were like psychic, and when they came to the realm of Earth back during the prehistoric age, they arrived here in like their elven castle that came through the astral plane. And when they arrived, they tried to talk mentally to the humans, and the humans picked up a big giant stick and bashed them in the head. And the goblins that were their servants and whatnot, and the trolls and things that were their little tiny little servants, ran off into the woods and began breeding. And the elves that did survive used their mental powers to survive by blending into the environment, using the different environments. And that's how they became different types of elves and things. Some went into the woods and bonded with wolves. Some went into the desert and bonded with things out there. It was all kinds of things in the ocean and the mountains and swamps and things like that. So yeah, um, pretty cool series. But it was a little bit of like, hey, we're powerful, arrogant elves. We're just going to mind control you. And then it was like, nope, we're going to bash your brains in. Drew says, nah, I am not going to give elves and orcs and all the other peoples the same colonial, pastoral, patriarchal nonsense that is so prevalent with humankind. No, that doesn't make them the heroes just because if you do that, right? Like, I'm suggesting that this does not make them the heroes. That the while it is very common that is a thing, it also is the thing that like is usually shoved down and hidden away, which is why I'm talking about today, which is a national holiday here in the United States, Juneteenth, which wasn't till very recently. When was Juneteenth recognized a federal holiday? 2021. Yep. President Joe Biden signed the bill on June 17, 2021, making Juneteenth the 11th American federal holiday and the first to obtain legal observance as a federal holiday since Martin Luther King Jr. Day was designated in 1983, which is also relatively recent, which is always my argument about people who don't particularly like the idea that the United States, that we have a separate month for Black History Month, and there's a lot of people in Middle America that are just like, well, it should just be American history. We shouldn't be separated, which I agree with, right? But the counter to that is, then if you're going to say that, include all of our history and teach all of that history. And even Juneteenth, that most people here in the United States since 2021, and it was created as a national holiday, don't even know what it means. And because they don't know what it means, going back to the beginning of our conversation, because they don't know what it means, it's a sign of ignorance, meaning like, I don't know a thing. And people fear being thought of as ignorant, and so fear turns into anger and dismissal. Like, well, because I don't know a thing and I didn't grow up with that thing, it shouldn't be a thing. And as a matter of fact, you should get rid of it, right? You're just placating your base, your political base or something like that, which, part of that is true as well. Not to say that that isn't true, because that is true. But it also means that yes, this is an actual part of history. So we do have two separate Independence Days. One Independence Day is when the United States became its own country, free from you guys across the pond, right? Whatever. And then the other Independence Day is when all American citizens were then free, which happened almost 90 years later. The End King says, hidden away, just like Odin in the MCU with Hela. Yep. This also touches on the forgotten soldier thing we were talking about. Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have, I think a great tabletop role-playing story element is the forgotten history. And there's a lot of drama that can be called from it, because what ends up happening is, instead of having an antagonist, instead of having an enemy, you can have an antagonist. So an example would be that the mythology of the good people versus the evil people, the fear of some of the historical events coming out may bring about guilt and an admission of crimes and things of that nature. Whereas in the modern context, the people that were involved in that event in the first place may feel more guilt and dishonor, and they may feel that if the secret got out, that it's worse than it would really be. Again, going back to the fact of people not wanting Juneteenth to be around, people who are against Kwanzaa, people who are against these things, maybe your fear is so unjustified that maybe you're encouraging yourself or making yourself feel something that is a thing that really wouldn't really be a thing, right? It's like, yeah, we know that every country sends spies against the other country. Like, that's not a thing you need to be like, well, no, we didn't. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Now, is that horrible? Well, depends on the eye of the beholder, right? Which, talking about fantasy, right? The fact that the goodly knights drove off the evil empire, but really what happened was there were backdoor dealings where they were able to make a deal for peace, and that peace involved giving up some land, making a certain treaty, ignoring some of the crimes that happened. That very much happens all the time when it comes to major nation states. But that disrupts the mythology of the goodly knights defeating the imagery of the goodly knight fighting off the dragon or the undead hordes or the Lich King. Written in the history books is is the bravest warriors went to battle in the battlefield and drove off the evil empire. But really, what happened were there were diplomats sitting in the background, you know, talking late into the night with the other evil empire people, eating bad takeout and coming to terms and writing down things in a book and going, whew, well, it took us about 45 days, but we hashed it out. I think this is all right. And the goodly nation is like, okay, so let's get this straight. So we owe you, we're going to tithe you so much, you know, alcohol and food and some of our foodstuffs. And in return, during the warmer months, you're going to allow our trade route to go up north and go past your lands. And they're like, yeah, that's all we wanted. And they're like, oh, really? You attacked our lands to do that? Well, you wouldn't listen to us. And they go, okay, well, that's it. Great. We made a deal. All right, see ya. um, that may be a thing. Or, you know, maybe the goodly people were less like, we're not going to win this war. We're going to have to send some black ops people behind the scenes and just murder kill these people, right? We're just going to have to like poison their food and threaten their families and set fire to their homes and and put down evidence to get them to backstab each other. And oh yeah, by the way, we're also going to I don't know, drop drop some kind of like black ooze and gray ooze and ochre jellies in jars flying overhead in the clouds and just drop it behind enemy lines and see what happens and let that stuff spread along with the rust monsters and mimics that we decided to throw like landmines over into the enemy territory and let you know let things come what may. And it's like, don't go into the evil lands, it's destroyed, it's everything's there to kill you. And the goodly people were like, shh, we're the ones that made it that way, shh, don't say anything. um yeah, very much so. So guys, thank you very much for being part of the show. Thank you very much for allowing me to rant and rave and talk about these kind of things. And I really, what I hope is that even if you don't find anything specific in our discussions, but you find a nugget of inspiration from something, and using holidays and real world events and things like that are, while we it can have very many touchy feelings because it is so close to, you know, it's the proverbial, ooh, should I have said something, is it too soon kind of thing. It also does relate to the fact that there's an old mantra that says life is stranger than fiction. And sometimes the strangest, most amazing things, most decadent things, most horrible things, most enlightening things happen in the real world. And once you layer on top of that some really cool imagery from science fiction and modern day and fantasy, it gives us some good stories. I'll bring up Game of Thrones yet one more time. George R. R. Martin is notorious for saying that he pulled many of his storylines by mixing and matching the historical nobility from the past and just mixing and matching different ones. And the same thing can happen here. So, yeah, taking a real world event. I am off work today, so Juneteenth is a holiday for us here. But for those who are across the pond, I hope there's some things in your past that you may not know too much about, or maybe there are holidays or different things that maybe should come to light, and you can use those as for your tabletop role playing fuel, or just maybe just world building if you're someone who wants to be a playwright or a writer or game designer or something like that. Not novelist, graphic novelist or something of that nature. So guys, have a great one. Thank you very much for being part of the show. I'm not going to take too much more of your time. Thank you very much for just allowing me to be me, and for you guys bringing your brilliance. Thank you, N King and Drew and everyone else who's able to participate. Lastly, nah, you guys know what to do. Call to action, you know, like, share, subscribe, follow, thumbs up, whatever. Do all the good stuff if this is the kind of thing you like. And lastly, if this is the kind of subject you like to talk about, or there are other subjects you'd like to talk about, don't hesitate to send out a message either in the comment section or what have you, and just go, hey, you know what? hey, have you ever read this book? Have you ever seen this show? Um, did you know about this particular event that happened in history, since we're talking about that? Or did you know about this particular festival or whatnot? Um, yeah, let's talk about that. Or even role playing games that have been released. Uh, Quinn, Ben Milton of Questing Beast just talked about his own game, Knave, that I talked about. Even things like that. Like, hey, we have a bunch of games out. MCDM's game, Daggerheart, um, DC 20 is getting a lot of attention. We're not even talking about Tales of the Valiant and Level Up. Advanced Fifth Edition has kind of disappeared into the background, but we can even talk about those games as well. So anyway, guys, have a great one. I'll see you later. Peace. I'm out.